Okay, guys, we are back here on the Morning Buzz, and as promised, an interview with the president of Active Minds. Cris Morillo is joining us on the show. We're very glad to have him. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Isaiah.
Yeah. Hey, it's your second appearance on the show as well.
It is.
I know. You might as well be a recurring cast.
I mean, I was considering it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love to hear that he might be joining the WMSC fam.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
So we have a very important week. Do you want to give some people the impact of what's going on this week?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to stress the importance of mental health awareness week, month, all of the above, because they all serve a similar purpose, right? So it's extremely important because of these few statistics, right? And there's many more reasons, but these are the primary ones that I have, right? So one, 73% of students experience some sort of mental health crisis during college, right? So when we're talking about students and mental health being a resource for college students, 73% is huge. That's almost 75, three quarters. That's a lot. Uh, Mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and substance use are actually associated with lower GPA and a higher probability of dropping out of college. Only 25% of students with a mental health problem seek help. And there's a tremendous lack of services in colleges and universities, like I mentioned before, on college campuses. The ratio of certified counselors to students is about one for every 1,000 to 200 to 2,000 students, depending on which university you go to. So that's such an underwhelming statistic.
It really is. I didn't know any of those actually.
Mhm.
Very interesting to hear that. But how important do you think mental health resources for college students are?
I think they're very important because, again, like I said, it's so underserved. But it's also very important because if people don't have an outlet for these strong emotions, for all this stress, it can actually build up into what's known as GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder, which is the most common mental illness in the United States. So it's very important that we are lessening those statistics as much as possible, especially because generalized anxiety disorder and depression are highly linked with suicide. And that's something that we really, really want to lower our risk of getting.
Yeah. So, something that is very important for communities that, I am part of, people of color, Hispanic, Black, Asian, all these other communities, a lot of time mental health isn't really taken seriously for our communities. And how do you think that mindset can change for us?
Man, it's really tough because a lot of this mental health stigma comes from something known as intergenerational trauma. And what intergenerational trauma is negative psychological effects imposed on a group of individuals, which carry into a following generation of a population. Now, what that means is if something is affecting a group of people, like let's say it's an epidemic of, um, so like let's take the Holocaust, for example. Everybody from the minority groups that were affected by the Holocaust were negatively affected, but they all had a very similar experience of oppression, right? So that trauma that was experienced by that generation of people in that population actually carries on into the following generation because of things like creating prejudice, stereotypes, mistrust, and skepticism between communities, whether it be, the majority or the minority group. In this case, it would be the minority group towards the majority group, which just feeds into this trauma, this lack of trust with anybody else and their surroundings because they feel like they're constantly going to be attacked, right? So
Yeah.
a way that we can reduce that, right, that mistrust and the skepticism is by preaching that therapy is not just for white people. That's something that a lot of people of color, tend to believe. Um, so we could definitely do that. Leading by example to normalize that therapy is not just for quote unquote crazy people. You can go to therapy yourself and really show that it's really not as bad as people say. It's actually very healthy. It's a good outlet for these strong emotions. to prevent the GAD, like I said before. And yeah, that's just a few examples.
Yeah, Chris. And I think it's really interesting that you mention all these things because I agree, right? As someone who is Hispanic, when you go to therapy or you seek help or information, it could sometimes come off as weak. And I know there's always like these stigmas around someone who advocates for their own mental health or just their well-being. So, with that being said, do you think these stigmas surrounding mental health illnesses has changed throughout the years? Is it changing, or do you think it's still very prominent, those negative stigmas?
Wow. I would say that it's definitely decreased. The
Uh-huh.
stigma is it's still there, but it's definitely much less than it was generations ago, decades ago. And you see that because a lot more people statistically prove, I don't have the statistics with me, I don't know them off the top of my head, but generation Z is much more open to talking about their mental health and not feeling like they're open to not feeling great, like their mental health is not great, but they're also more open to going to therapy as they're the highest generation, highest percent for a generation to go to therapy.
And I think with social media, especially, and then specifically, I'm referring to like TikTok, you hear people share their stories and how they're dealing with it or what works for them. That I think it's super empowering for everybody else to kind of be like, or at least for our generation, to just really be like, "Oh, it's okay," you know. So I love that there's always someone advocating for this
Right.
because it's so necessary.
It affects everybody, you know, it's such a human thing. It's not, it spans across cultures.
For sure.
Definitely does. So this week is Mental Illness Awareness Week, as we mentioned earlier on in the show. And as the president of Active Minds here at Montclair, what does this week mean to you?
So this week means to me a lot of things, right? But the first thing that comes to mind is being an advocate, right? A lot of people are suffering from mental illness that we don't see. A lot of the time, um, mental health, mental illness are conditions that are very different from one person to the next. So to say that it's textbook is such an understatement because there are a certain amount of categorized symptoms that you can look at, but everybody experiences life differently. So I would say the first thing that comes to mind is being an advocate for everybody, not just people with mental illness, but especially people with mental illness during Mental Illness Awareness Week, right? Another thing that comes to mind is remembrance. We want to remember the people who have died or lost their lives to the battle of mental health through the means of suicide. The last thing that comes to mind is being an agent for change, right? So if the chances are you know somebody who's dealing with a mental health condition, you want to be able to be the best support for them possible. I'm sure that's the case if you love them and you really want to see the best for them, you'll advocate as an agent of change. And what that means is you'll push for laws that help people that to help people get more access to mental health resources, and also have laws change around mental illness.
And it's interesting that you say that though, because personally, I didn't know it was mental illness week until I heard about this interview,
Right.
right? And I think it saddens me that I didn't know this, and I'm not sure. And I tend to be one of those individuals that it's very well informed, right? I open my emails, I read things, I do all this stuff to stay well known and to know what's going on in the world. And I just can't believe that I didn't know this. So, for individuals like myself and maybe other our listeners who may have not known this was Mental Illness Awareness Week, how can they help create more awareness or just know what's that this week is so important because of this?
Right. So I would say that the best way is to get educated, right? A lot of There's a lot of misinformation out there and you don't want to trust every single thing that you see. Um, so I would say get educated, know the statistics and know how this can affect you, but also go get out there. You know, you want to be able to make that change for everybody. So I would say experience therapy, know what it can do for you, and spread that love. Show everybody else what therapy is, what it could do for you. Show them the right information so that they're not getting um, misinformed, so that the following generations are not getting misinformed, and we're living in a place of much less stress.
Yeah. So you see a lot of people in life where you see them struggling with some type of mental illness, and a lot of times they don't seek help themselves, and it's almost that the people around them have to get them to seek the help that they need. How do you approach that situation from any perspective, really?
Well, like I said before, I think that I would tell them about how therapy has helped me during a difficult time in my mental health journey. And that was during the pandemic, right? Where we all were just suppressed by our environment. So I try to relate to them and really try and see them out the best way that I could. Uh, and statistics are so important. It's hard, cold facts. It's evidence showing that this stuff is real. This stuff can affect your health. If you have stress built up in your life, it can manifest into something like heart disease, like high blood pressure. Like these are real um medical conditions that can come from something as little as stress. And I'm not saying little, but these are things that are preventable, and it's much harder to go backwards with once you have those conditions. So I would do that. I would relate to them, and I would show them, caution them. I would caution them about why this is important.
Chris, I'm curious. As the president of Active Minds, have you seen? And I know you mentioned how it was very hard during the pandemic when we were all like cooped up, but now have you seen an increase of students kind of reaching out to you or joining this or just trying to be more aware with themselves and that they are struggling as well?
Right. So, I mean, last time I was on the show, I talked about how I actually joined Active Minds over the pandemic. I wasn't involved beforehand, but from what I've seen at the student organization fair, if that's any indication of what students' mindsets are like, I would definitely say that people are prioritizing their mental health and they see the value in that, because you have people coming over and they're like, oh, what is this? And you see Active Minds, it's, if you know what it is, it's very obvious, but if you don't, it's not, right? So you get people coming in and they're asking, and you tell them that it's a group that advocates for mental health and tries to reduce the stigma of mental illness, and they're like, wow, that's really cool. I want to join part of that fight. And that's amazing to hear from somebody who's so passionate about psychology and mental health. It's a growing epidemic, and it's about time that we start squashing that, you know?
Do you think Montclair does a good job in providing students with resources to help with mental illnesses?
Definitely, I think so, because we have CAPS, which is, if you don't know, it's counseling and psychological services on campus. Um, and we offer short-term therapy. We offer Let's Talk spaces, which Let's Talk is actually a 15-minute group one-on-one session with a therapist. It's a check-in. You're dealing with the more so the situations in your life, like, how do I respond to this text, or what did my friend mean when they said this? And it's really just asking for advice so that you're not, you're not unpacking everything. It's not like we're doing psychodynamic theory, CBT theory. It's not as elaborate, but it's a really great first step for beginners as well, who are not so accustomed to therapy. We also have more of a standby approach with Tau Connect. And what Tau Connect is it's an application run by the school, and it provides resources, documents on mental health, statistics, and you can really go through it at your own pace to navigate and really inform yourself on mental health. So if you didn't really want to approach a therapist, or if you didn't feel comfortable with the pandemic, that's also an option available to you. And not to mention, we have Active Minds. If you want to come in and talk about your mental health, your experiences, and just get educated, we're a great resource as well.
Absolutely. And here in the studio today, we are filled with a bunch of young adults, all in college, pursuing our degrees. And last night, as I was doing research for this interview, I was looking at the Active Minds website, and I saw this super troubling statistic where it said suicide is the second leading cause of death among young adults. And then as I was sitting there, I was wondering, how can we combat something that big?
Right. No, it definitely is a scary statistic, but I think that by having conversations and lowering the stigma, while that is easier said than done, you're making things more accessible, you're being more empathetic, and you're realizing that not everybody has the same experiences, right? So if we can show that empathy, right? If we can get everybody to understand, like, since this is not a textbook profession, right? Since it's not a textbook issue, let's say, you can't assume what somebody else is experiencing, the mental anguish, the pain. And so just by being empathetic and saying, hey, I hear you. I know what you're going, I may not necessarily know what you're going through, but I can understand how difficult this might be for you. And taking that step back and trying to understand, even trying to understand is a huge step forward for people in this community.
You mind if I hop in the next question?
Sure,
Right.
yeah, of course.
Okay.
Sal has another question. Let's see. Let's hear it, Sal.
Okay.
Better be a
Okay.
good one. No
So,
pressure.
Going off of what you just said,
Sure.
say I know someone that's going through something. How can I, as someone that I say, as someone that cares about them, how can I more be there for them and be more supportive?
I think for the state that you're in right now, right, it's very difficult because I feel like a lot, again, like I said before, a lot of us are misinformed on mental health, but for the layperson who's trying to help everybody else, it's really giving them resources. It's knowing your statistics, it's knowing basic mental health statistics. It's knowing who they can reach out to and knowing the difference between the professions, because that's a huge misconception in and of itself. The difference between a counselor, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, psychologist. These are terms that people like to use interchangeably, but in reality, they all hold very different roles. And just knowing the difference between that and knowing who to connect them to, again, a huge step forward.
I love that. I love that. And there's another statistic that I saw that was very concerning to me, right? Only 44% of adults and less than 20% of children with diagnosable mental health problems receive the treatment they need. What, in your opinion, needs to be done in order to bridge that gap?
Right. I think, we definitely have the issue of there being different generational views on mental health. So, someone from Gen X might see an issue with mental health as a sign of weakness, right? Whereas Gen Z is looking at going to therapy and mental illness as a sign of strength and going in and really working on yourself. But one way that we can tackle this is by having them have conversations, looking at the issues that this is providing for everybody, and really take a step back and see this is not so different for you and me, knowing that we're both suffering. And even though your views are different than mine, we need to make this more accessible and we need to fight for our right to have mental health. We need to go out there and fight for a right to have a social worker, to have a psychologist, psychiatrist, licensed marriage and family therapy. We need to have our mental health in check, just like any other health profession. You go to your GP, your general practitioner, to get your physical done, right? Why does the same not apply for your mental health? It 110% should be,
Mhm.
and it should be provided for everybody. It should be accessible and affordable for every single person in this population.
I love that
Yeah.
that you mentioned that last one thing, that it's accessible and
Affordable.
affordable to a lot of people,
Mhm.
because I have met so many people who have like the state's insurance, which is like Medicaid or Medicare, depending on what your age is, right?
Right.
And when they seek mental health from like a clinic, it's so hard to get an appointment. It's so, or if you might get an appointment, but it's 3 months out. So what can happen? Like if I'm already struggling, for example, like let's say it's me. If I'm already struggling today, right? And now you want me to wait 3 months to get help, I could, like something could happen. Like I may not be able to wait that long. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so I think that's a very, very, very important aspect to mention, that a lot of people, like, yes, we're breaking down these stigmas of mental health, and especially in Black and brown communities, that it's so like prominent, like it's like a sign of weakness, or it's not something where that's seen in a positive light. But you also have to understand that those who do want to break that stigma, who want to get the help, sometimes they can't because of the lack of resources, or because they don't have insurance, or they don't have X, Y, and Z, right? So I love that you mentioned that, because that's a huge component. Not only is it the stigma that it has, but it's also if they cannot have access to it. And I love that here in Montclair, like you mentioned, there's, Active Minds, there's CAPS, there's a whole bunch of resources that we can use. So I definitely want to encourage any student, if they ever need help, to seek it, because there's help. And I think we're very blessed to have resources at our fingertips. So.
Definitely. It's, and I can't tell you how many students have come in. I mean, I also work at the OSJD, which is the Office of Social Justice and Diversity. And I can't tell you the amount of students who come in. They're like, we have free therapy. Yes, we do have free therapy. That, you get that privilege as a student here at Montclair State. So I would definitely advise everybody to use their therapy sessions with Dr. Jude, Dr. Suda. They're really great resources for you as a therapist. And even, if you want advice, it doesn't even need to be like psychological intervention. They're really, really great people.
Absolutely. And we cannot thank you enough for coming on the show, Cris, and spreading, awareness for Mental Health Illness Week, and not even just the week, but just in general. People, the resources are here. If you need help, even if you don't feel like you need help, still take advantage of it. And once again, we cannot thank you enough. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of Active Minds here at Montclair State, Cris Morillo, thank you.